There we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming and registering for this webinar. Um, I want to introduce Adrina Corrales Lujan. She is a wonderful client of mine. She's the executive director of Sisters of Color United for Education. She's a powerful speaker and a huge, huge advocate for Indigenous communities, which is definitely the reason why we wanted to bring her here today to talk to us all about speaking and communicating about Indigenous communities ethically. So, yeah, without further ado, I want to pass the baton on over to Adrina. Thank you all for being here.
Hello. Welcome to the fever dream that is reality right now. My name is Adrina, and I I think there is a lot going on in the world right now. So please feel free to ask questions, put questions in the chat. What I was hoping is if people could um, maybe put one thing they would like to get out of this training into the chat, and I can make sure, because it's a nice small little group, that I can make sure that I'm addressing making sure that I'm able to be able to, answer your questions as needed. So feel free to put stuff in the chat. Um, and this is my lived experience. I'm not coming as the executive director, but I do run an organization. We're Colorado's first and oldest Promotora program, which is basically like the community health worker model, is what we've created. And when we think about education, when we think about how we heal as human beings, a lot of it has to do with our thoughts, our behaviors, the stories that we grew up in. And I think right now, what's going on is there's a little bit of, you are all of your ancestors. The blood that is like going through your veins right now is your ancestors. It is your abuelas, it is your grandparents. And I think right now, as we're kind of going through this like collective, I would like to say trauma. I think we're in a really interesting position, and I think folks that are working in any kind of PR is really an opportunity to help people tell their stories with dignity. And so, like I said, I don't know if this is right. I don't know if this is wrong, but this is just my experience. So feel free to, get in where you fit in. Let's see. I did close like 100 of my tabs so that it didn't look insane when I shared my screen. So, um, and if you can let me share my screen, then I can put up the presentation. Perfect. Desktop. Okay. So, um, so, um, I'm sorry, I have two kittens and they want to be in the meeting as well. So if there's like noises, that would be them. So I have worked in community health locally and globally for over 20 years. And our program, we do health education, art, and leadership. And yeah, that's just stuff about me. Nobody, that's fine. You don't need to know about me. But if you do have questions, please ask. So the reason that we need to have some of these conversations, I think especially now, is that there is a lot of power in the words and the way that we choose to dictate stories. And so it is a privilege to be able to tell other people's stories, to help create narratives. And it is, I think, especially now, in a time where there's a lot of inhumane things going on, to have the ability to tell the story, to really to reach people where they need to be, I think it is a privilege. And so, as folks that are helping shape stories, it's really important that we're creating narratives that are both uh, truthful and accurate. And I think in a time where there's a lot of misinformation, it's really important because it's a choice that you get to make as people crafting these messages. It's a choice that you have to kind of come to terms with yourself about how you want to present things, or what is your moral and ethical stance on a lot of things. And I know that that's not always a popular way of thinking about the world, but it is, you know, that is part of the privilege. So you also have a lot of I think, especially now, it's just important that when we're telling stories, we're thinking about it from a lot of different perspectives, and we're having truthful stories. I always say, you should ask the grandmothers. So this image here is actually a mural that we created. It is at El Pueblo Museum. It's called Somos Agua. And I think what's important to realize about the historical impact of the Americas, I think people throw the term America around a lot, but we live in the United States, right? And the Americas are actually South America, North America, Central America, and we call this Turtle Island. And so I think even when we're crafting any type of information, that we really have the historical information, because that is, that's very important in how we are presenting things. A lot of people really don't know history very well, and because we don't have a good grasp on the historical impacts of colonization, it changes the way that we create our narratives now. So a lot of times people are like, I mean, Gulf of America, but I'm gonna leave that there. So let's see. I don't know how to go to the next one. Oh, there it is. When we're looking at how we are culturally responsive. So I don't like to say like culturally sensitive. I like to say that we're responsive, because there's a lot of things around culture, and everybody has a culture. And so I think, as people that are going to be crafting these messages around culture, around other folks, I think it's important to do a little bit of inward work as well, and really knowing what your culture is. How would you want your culture remembered? And I think it's important, because we are all interconnected, right? So I think as we are creating these stories around how we're crafting stories for communities, we have to do it in a way that we would want our stories told too. So one of the ways that I think is really important, and this is one of the things that we teach, is we call it the socio-ecological model. And so your story as an individual, the way that you have relationships, the way that you show up in community, the way that society works, these are all interrelated. And so when we're looking at telling people's stories, we have to realize that it is happening on each level of this socio-ecological model. And if you want to get really if you want to go even more micro, we're looking at things like epigenetics. I think that right now a lot of people are kind of in a fight, flight, freeze, faint kind of position, because there is this like collective trauma that people are going through. I think when we're watching such inhumanity in the world. And I think that, the micro level is really important. So even beyond that individual level, we're looking at who we are as human beings. And then from a society level, depending on how you believe, what your beliefs are, we believe that we are cosmic beings, and I think when we can take our humanity and really look at it from a perspective of like, we're all on this little rock, that's floating through space all together. And we all want to be able to tell our stories and have our stories be heard. I think it changes the way that maybe we think about where we fit in the world. I love this image. This was done by a local artist. Um, he was one of my kiddos in high school. I started some youth programs, and they wouldn't give me a classroom, so we met in the stairway. Um, but all of my kids, they were always in trouble for like graffiti and stuff like that. And so I gave him paint, and now he's one of the big muralists in the city. This mural is actually on 38th and Brighton Boulevard. And his story is, his story is brilliant. And I think one of the things that when we're crafting stories, we have to remember our compassion and our humanity. And I think people are best at telling their own stories if we can create the space for them. So I'll get to some of that a little bit later too, on like basically like techniques. um is there anything in the chat right now? I feel weird just like talking to myself. So if anybody has like anything to say, please let me know.
Questions so far?
So when we think about how we are creating narratives, we have to realize that on that society level, that there is a reason that stories are crafted the way that they are. And years ago, I was in Washington, D.C., and I was in the subway, and I turned around and there was a weapons conference. And it was like, a big poster for this weapons conference. And when I looked at it, I was like, oh, wow, like they're having like a conference for war. And when I looked at um, who it was sponsored by, it was McGraw and Hill, which, if you've ever had to buy overpriced textbooks, you realize that they're one of the largest publishers of things. And one of the historical facts is that history is written by the people that have colonized, and history is written in its own narrative. And I think as we're seeing things like online, like on the CDC website, there's a lot of information and education that is starting to like come off of the website as there's a censoring going on, because there is a narrative that wants to be told right now, and it is a narrative of in my opinion, the narrative that is being kind of pushed out right now is around us and them, and around creating more divisions in community. And one way that they're able to do that is by taking away education, by taking away knowledge, and by creating their own narrative. And so when we look at who controls the narrative, I think that that's an important thing, because, you know, as an individual who is like I am, my community is my boss. I get to say things that maybe other people wouldn't want to say. But at the end of the day, like I have to come to terms with the things that come out of my mouth and how that impacts others. And what I've really realized over my life is that when you really look at who's controlling the narrative, it's like a follow the money type thing. You really understand why messages have been crafted in a very specific way, about especially Indigenous communities and people of color communities, immigrant communities, trans communities. And because people who are controlling these narratives aren't working from a factual basis a lot of the times, it creates problems. One of the really easy things is like I people have been talking about like this $8 million for transgender mice. And it's really funny because it's actually transgenic. So I'm actually a cell and molecular biologist by trade. And it's really funny because it's like people just took that word, they didn't know what it meant, and they kind of just ran with it. And it became a narrative that is being like pushed out about these transgender mice. And they don't even exist. So I think it's kind of interesting. So when we look at the historical erasure and misrepresentation of Indigenous communities, we're looking at it because, everything is kind of owned by the same companies. I don't know how, when we're looking at like, hi, this is Cholo. When we're looking at, can you move, please? Um, when we're looking at the historical erasure and misrepresentation of communities, it is because it has been at the detriment, right? The detriment to communities of color. But it was done in a strategic way. And so when we look at the word like genocide, right? That is the systematic annihilation of a people. And part of that systemic and institutional racism that has been happening in communities is one, by creating stereotypes, othering folks, tokenizing people, and appropriating people's culture. And there's a lot of real world information about this right now. I know from a PR standpoint, there's a lot going on with the Oscars and the Soldano person. I don't know if you know anything about that, but it's a choice to it's a choice to decide to be willfully ignorant at this point in history. But it's also when we're looking at the way that most community, sorry, he's got a cold. When we're looking at the way that most communities are represented, there's a reason that people are represented the way that they are. And it's usually so that we can demean people and justify inhumane practices, right? So for instance, when people say like illegal aliens and stuff like that, it's like, no, they're still human beings, right? We say undocumented. So I think, the word choices that people use, like you have to question, where did that concept come from? Where did that ideology come from? So this is part of one of our murals. I don't know if you've seen this image before, but it is for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so that's one of the symbols that people use a lot, that we use to talk about, the missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I think it's important when you're thinking about how you're crafting your messages that you realize, like, yes, you're creating this individual message, but it's also coming from a place where that society has impacted the way that you're even thinking about, different types of people and different types of communities. Um, you know, humans, man, I think we're going to be limited edition here pretty soon. But I think, like I said, history is written by the conquerors, right? And so the more that you can take away people's humanity, the easier it is to feel justified in hurting or doing things that aren't really ethical to folks. So we look at just things like stereotypes, cultural appropriation, like those are all just kind of things that have been accepted in society. And it I think as people that are crafting these messages, and I say that because as PR people, right, you're kind of like alchemists in a way, because you're helping taking like all of this information and putting it in a way that's edible for people, right? You're trying to create information for people to consume. So I think it behooves, I think it behooves of all of us to do a little bit of research about history, especially the history of the Americas, because there are so many different tribes, there's so many different communities. I think, for instance, with the immigration um, issues that are going on, right? This was Mexico. So California, Texas, New Mexico, in like the 1850s, 1860s, this was Mexico. And so when people are like, go home, it's like, well, this kind of was our home. And if you really think about it, we didn't cross the border crossed us, right? So when we're thinking about how we're putting together these messages, it's really important to have a cultural construct that is based in history. There's some really good books that I would recommend for people because it really helps you understand how your own implicit biases, our own subconscious um, impacts. It's called A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I think that's a really good book. Just to kind of have some context, right, about how this land came to be. Because if those stories are purposefully not told, um, and um, and it's gonna get harder for people to tell those stories. Um, we just have to be thoughtful about where words and phrases come from. This is actually my great great uncle. He was a deer dancer, and his godfather was Kit Carson, which is like really bizarre, right? So even in my own history, right, as an Indigenous woman from here, like from this land, from the San Luis Valley, from New Mexico, there's a lot of stories that have and haven't been told even in my own family. So I think it's like a good exercise for you to talk with your elders, talk with people that know your stories, because that's going to help you be able to guide folks in creating better communication strategies, because you know who you are, you know who and how you want to be represented. And I think that that's an important uh, it's an important avenue right now, um, because it's really interesting with all of the diversity, equity, inclusion, human rights, the way that things have been set up and are now being systematically dismantled, um, that you kind of have to decide, because it also, um, I think people are so afraid of like being canceled or being, um, whatever all of those things are. Um, you kind of have to come to terms with how this sounds really weird, so I'm just going to put that out there. But like when we die, we get to look back at our life and decide if we're proud of the things that we did and proud of the things that we said. And I think right now, especially with what is going on globally, I used to watch a lot. My mom's a professor, and so I always, I watched a lot of movies. Um, I watched a lot of movies. But when you're watching things or like reading things like Anne Frank and stuff like that, and you're like, what would I have been the person hiding somebody, or would I have been, like in Mississippi, they actually just passed a law where basically people can be like hunted for like $1,000 a head to turn in people into ice. And I think we get to decide now how we're going to be human again with each other. And so, when we're looking at the way that things have been traditionally, we have to kind of have our own moral and ethical compass. But sometimes telling stories and being honest and being honoring to people is not always it's not always received very well, right? And so I think as somebody that works for community, I'm in a different situation than folks that may be working for larger companies, because the way that, you know, wealth is distributed, you know, here, in this, you know, in capitalism, um, the way that, uh, like, it's not always going to be well received, right? So if you're trying to create a voice for the voiceless, if you're trying to work and promote stories of underserved communities, not everybody is not like, I don't know how to say this, but like it could put your job in jeopardy too, right? Because you're trying to tell stories, you're trying to craft messages, and not everybody wants to live in harmony and kumbaya, and you know, people have gained a lot of power and control, and that is not by accident, right? So I think it's just kind of important to think about, you know, situationally where you're at, where your companies are at, what are the, you know, is it in alignment with your personal values? um, and it's just something to think about. um, you know, there's all these like stereotypes. um, yeah, it's, you know, humans, we're just so interesting. um, And just so you know, Pocahontas was 12 years old. I just want to point that out. So, you know, it's like if you're gonna tell a story, at least tell it right. The reason that this is so important, is because, especially in communities of color, there is a lot of violence, and I think right now that's definitely what we're seeing. There is a lot of violence against folks, because people are, um, portrayed in certain ways, right? So when we are stereotyping, people, like putting all people into a group, it's harmful, and actually right now it can be deadly at this point, in history, because apparently we're going backwards in time. So I wanted to give you all some strategies. So if you are, in a place where you're able to do, so does anybody have any questions so far? It's just weird talking to myself. I don't know, like, um, I like see you all here, but I just wanted to give you a couple of tips that might be helpful. Um, so one is having representation from, diverse and inclusive, teams, having, you know, contractors, having a network of folks that you can pass ideas through. Um, you know, from different cultural backgrounds, from different educational backgrounds, really creating good teams is important. Um, and two is just to do like a little analysis of, you know, how does the power flow, in terms of decision making, right? Um, I think that's just, it's important to kind of understand the landscape, right? Um, so that's important to have some like cultural consultants, and you know, in community there's a lot of different folks, so like reach out to, you know, to other people in the network. If you don't know somebody from a certain community, you know, reach out and try to find folks. I think there's a lot of good resources. You know, Denver's community is very small. Like we're like a big small town, um, and so we're, you know, just think about having inclusive and diverse teams. Um, when you're looking at ethical storytelling and representation, you want to make sure that you're engaging with the community. So a lot of times, um, people are like, well, there are no like, I just went down that Oscar like rabbit hole the other day, and it was really interesting. Because they don't even seem to like Mexicans, but they made a whole movie about Mexicans, and it's like set in Mexico, but then they're like, this has nothing to do with Mexico or Mexicans. It's very interesting. So I would say that there's a little unethical ness in the way that 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 people are and choose to be. And when communities say something, right, like, hey, that's a stereotype, I don't want that perpetuated, or you can't just be like, well, I'm sorry, that's how you feel, right? That's very dismissive and condescending, and gaslighting. And so when you're looking at ethical storytelling, like, you have to be willing to listen to the people. You have to be willing to listen to the people that it impacts, the people whose stories they are. um, and you know uh, it's important to also create the tools so that people can tell their own stories, um, because there are uh, um, we have to create those opportunities. I think there's only one, I want to say there's one company that creates media that's like indigenous run. It's in Santa Fe. Um, they made that really good TV series about the res. But you know, they're telling their own stories, and that's kind of important too. Is like, maybe sometimes people are have to be willing to step down and let other people lead. Um, this is like having a good community around you, um, having relationships with cultural leaders, grassroots organizations, advocacy groups, um, being able to listen to where people are at and integrate the information that they're giving you into the communication strategies that you have, um, and supporting and promoting things that align with your value system, and also the value system of like your potential clients, right? um, I think a lot of times, because of capitalism and the way that capitalism has impacted every facet of our life, sometimes it's like people only decided to start uh, selling things to certain groups when they realized that they could monetize off of it, not because they actually wanted to do those things. So it's interesting to think about how uh, the value alignment, I think, is really important right now. And like I was saying, can you please move Chona? Um, that as um, it's a luxury to be able to speak your mind. And like I said, it's not always well received. Not everybody, uh, um, wants to be humane right now. So it's important to have a good community that you're engaging with, and have different ties in there. Um, Responsible crisis management. We're human beings, we're having a human experience, or maybe we're spiritual beings having human experience, I'm not really sure. But when we do mess up, we should take accountability. I know, by basically telling the community, like, uh I don't know who the PR person for that Oscar person was. I mean, she was problematic anyway, but instead of taking accountability and saying, yeah, there were some stereotypes and maybe we could have made it better, or maybe, it was just like, well, I'm sorry you felt like that. It is very much like a bad narcissistic relationship. So, we have to take accountability and not deflect, right? Put it on to somebody else. um, I think accountability is really important right now. because we are human beings and we are trying to get, we're trying to like walk through the mud together. And so, sometimes, um, we're not perfect. We don't always say the right things or do the right things, but if we can be accountable to that and try to make it better, that's important. And that's like, that's I think kind of what it means to be human. And then also creating policies or frameworks for how things are done. Like, there's the crafting of the message, but then it's like, is there like a group that it goes through, or some individuals that can look at some of those statements, so that the communication the container of the communication is, it goes through it, there should be many eyes on it. Having ethical partnerships and influencer selection. I had an elder teacher. He's from Guatemala, and he was coming to Denver during 2012, when everybody thought the Mayan calendar was ending and that we were all going to die. Uh, and he one night we were talking, and he said it that basically there's going to be less gray um, as things become more polarized. And at first I was like, yeah, like I've got my team, I've got, my people, like I feel like, we're good. And then over the last decade, there is less gray, right? There's less room in the middle. And that's kind of why we have to, where we find alignment with folks, I think is really important. When we're looking at ethical partnerships, right? We want to be value aligned with people right now. I think, when you look at things like the boycotts that are happening, and, there is a value alignment that is it's coming to the forefront, right? But because we've othered people for so long and separated people for so long, I think it's an interesting time right now. So that's why I'm saying you kind of have to do your own soul searching, I think, because when you're creating good messaging, it's coming from an authentic place, and that's from within you, right? You are privileged to be able to tell stories, to be a storyteller, to be communicating, right? um our words, words are bond, words are so they're so important. And if we're not able to if something doesn't sit right with us, right, it's probably not going to sit right with other people. So it's like, you want to have these ethical partnerships, you want to have authentic relationships with folks, but that comes first from you. And so it's great that you guys have the ability to take these trainings. um there's a lot of like I'm saying, the historical context is really important. I think when we look at like the women's suffrage movement, when we look at, there's a lot of messaging that's going out right now. I don't think it's very hard to find problematic messaging right now at all. So, it's important to educate yourself so that you have enough context to work from. There is a lot of really great women of color authors and stuff as well. And it's like, you have to kind of sometimes go out of your comfort zone to find these tools, to find these folks, because maybe they're not in your circles, but they exist, right? Like we exist as a people. Um, you know we exist, and that's um it's hard when other people want to tell our stories, um, and but they don't want us in our own stories, you know. It's like, oh, you want Mexican food, but you don't want the Mexicans. Like, what are we doing here? Um, so I think continuous education, obviously, is really important. Um, just being thoughtful of language, how accessible is the language. Um, I work with 7 generations of people. So I work with like teenagers all the way up to elders. And having inclusive language is, sometimes it's difficult, but it takes extra time. And so when you're crafting these messages, when you're able to it's like take the time up front to really be in community, to ask community. um People want to tell their stories, um and uh you know um and it's important that we do tell our stories right now, right? It's a shame that we have to humanize people. um it's a complicated time. um like, it's okay to say, like, these people over there, they don't deserve food, or they don't deserve the pursuit of happiness, right? um because historically, manifest destiny was how um the United States was founded, right? And so um it in a time like this, um we have to tell the stories of the people that they are trying to erase, of um women's rights. There's a lot going on. Like, every day I'm like, what shit show has happened today? I'm on a group text with my friends, and it's like every day there's just something else, and it's like, is this really what we're doing as human beings right now? This is what we're putting our energy towards. um and so I think for you all that are crafting messages, that are creating communication tools for people, um it's it's not easy. And you need community around you too, and that is going to strengthen your messaging. When you are putting together these words, when you are, you know putting together these sound bites for people, you have to have a good team of people around you that's filtering and helping amass that information and putting it in a way that's accessible to people, but also, like, we can't do this on our own, right? We have to have good teams of people around us. Um, and that is why it's important for that transparency and accountability structures. And you have to want to do that. Like, this is kind of like, I guess when we were talking yesterday, it's like, to you have to want to be a good human right now. You have to want, like, you have to feel it. um or try to feel something. I don't know what's going on, but you have to, you have to want to um craft these messages from a place of love, right? um and accountability. So, have a good team around you. I don't know if you have, like, close friends. And I just think that that's really important right now too. To see what is going to, I think it's just helpful. So, and that's having transparency. That's what allows for better messaging, for better things to happen if people are transparent about it. Um, so uh, I could tell you things. Um, I think in terms of storytelling, um, that's a lot of what our organization has done. Is we've helped tell the stories of the people. We've told the stories of the grandmothers. We've listened to stories. I feel very grateful that in my work, I've done a lot of different types of work. I've got to listen to so many stories. I used to do a lot of outreach. So I ran like an STI, HIV clinic and stuff like that. And I used to do a lot of outreach on like Broadway and Colfax. I call it the cold hard facts. And, you know, just being able to stand there, people came and wanted to have they wanted someone to hear their stories, right? Um, I have heard so many stories, and it's always, um, I think almost sometimes it's like there's this like enchanting thing about the universe. Sometimes you hear exactly what you need to hear. Um, and that's, you know, because you're putting yourself out there, but it's like, you know, there are like blessings come through other people's stories, you know. Um, there's I think I I really liked I don't know if you've ever seen Amy Tan, but she had this really good movie, is a book. It's called The Joy Luck Club, and it was like a story about mothers and daughters. And you know, there's all these like really good media that was created, you know, uh by people and for, you know, like by people of color, to tell the stories, to tell the um you know, to tell the stories. You just have to be willing to want to hear them. So I don't know, go tell a story, tell your own story. We do an exercise called conocimiento, which is like a getting to know you. And like think about like, what is your name? Who named you? um like, who are you named after? We just created this new we're starting to work on our social media and all of that, and we people started telling these stories about their name, and just think about how meaningful is your name, right? um you know, where were you born? Were you lucky enough to meet your grandparents? um, you know, what type of patterns do you have in your own family that you see in yourself? All of those like intrinsic things about getting to know you is like, you have to know yourself so that you can also help other people be known as well. uh, we have a really good website. I'll put it in the chat. And we have a lot of videos on there as well. And if you go in, you can click on each of the murals, and inside of the murals are people's healing process, but the stories that they tell are so brilliant. And so it's like, you know, maybe we're not the best people to tell other people's stories. Sometimes we just have to make space for people to tell their own stories. So please look at our website, watch some videos, um, and tell your own story. You know, it's important. You know, it's important to, you know, it's important. It's for future generations, right? When we think 7 generations ahead, um, you know, those stories are important. They're impactful. Um, I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments, or this crazy lady telling me to go talk to my grandparents. Like, um, yeah, I'm hoping that I answered what you came here for. But if anybody needs anything, I'm here. I really want to thank Bry for, you know, always having my back. You know, when you talk about having a good team of people, uh, you know, Bry is one of those people that really helped me so much when we had to tell our story, you know. And so I'm really grateful for people um, like Bry, because like, we can't do this alone, you know. So build your teams, you know, maybe get a little bit of water, you know, just in case shit, I don't know. You know, this is how we're going to survive as humans right now. So you know, be kind, let's be kind and loving with one another, but let's also have accountability and historical accuracy. Oh
Awesome.
yeah.
We have some questions in the chat, or
Okay.
or we have some questions in the question and answer
Oh, I
thing.
don't even know where that is.
And the people want to see your cats.
Oh yeah, they're so adorable. This is Tequini Ma'anki. So her name is Tequini, means leaper because she like hops everywhere. And Ma'anki is hunter because I have a very old house and I don't want mice. So I named her the um, the leaping hunter, the huntress. And Cholo is adorable. He's named after the Aztec dog. Come here, Cholito. And this is Cholo. And his name is Cholo, like, there's an Aztec dog because it's like it's this beautiful black dog. And his other name is Piltontli, which means little guy, because he's like the runt. So he's like, I don't know, maybe like half the size of his sister. um, any other questions? Are we good? Oh, Q&A. There it is.
I saw you try to put the website in the chat, but I didn't see it pop up
Oh,
in
okay.
the webinar chat.
Other communicators. How do we navigate situations where leadership or clients are resistant? Yeah. I think um I think being human with people is important. Um, Bringing facts is also important. A lot of times people don't want to change those narratives. And you kind of just have to be upfront with people like, this is a harmful narrative. Is this what you really, is this how you want to be remembered? Is this part of your legacy? Right. And I think just, being upfront with people is important. And it's like, do you want to, uh, um, I mean, I say that's a very valid question. Um, I've had to do that with foundations. It's like, do you actually want to solve a problem or are you just providing lip service? I'm sure there's a nicer way of saying that. But, and if people just want to do the lip service, then that's, you can do that, if that's what your job is to do. But I pose that question to people a lot. Like, do you actually want to solve a problem or do you just want to like not? Um, and I think having facts, figures, all of that's really important. But it's almost kind of like I stopped arguing with people um about like politics and stuff like that because I'm like, if you haven't read a book, if you haven't like done some of your own internal work, like why am I wasting my time and energy, right? So that's kind of that thing you have to decide for yourself. But I think a lot of times people are open to things. You just have to figure out like uh some of their um some of their story, and so it can be helpful to ask people about themselves, about their family, about, I think that is another avenue to do it. So you can just do the direct, like, do you want to do do you want to continue doing things that are maybe hurtful to people? Would you like to change? If not, cool, we can still craft your messaging and do what it is, but you don't have to do it that way. So I think um that's kind of your internal guide um about that. And I will put the website back. But thank you guys so much for your time. And if you have questions, reach out to Bri. She can get a hold of me. And I hope you guys have a lovely day. Enjoy the world.
Yes, thank you so much for talking with us today, Adrina. We really appreciate it. I don't know if you can see, but everyone in the chat is just saying thank you. These are really great little morsels of information to use as tools in our tool belt as communicators to be able to have these conversations. Because, like you said, this is a really hard time to be talking about stuff like this. So thank you for your expertise and your
Thank you for having me. You guys have a lovely day.
great.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.